Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about a system that I developed to monitor occupancy inside of a vehicle. So according to the Government of Canada, if Canadian motorists avoided idling for just 3 minutes every day of the year, we could reduce CO2 emissions annually by 1.4 million tons. So that's quite significant. Another statistic that's unrelated is that on average, we have 38 children that are under the age of 15 dying every year from a heat stroke because they're left inside of a really hot vehicle in the United States. And so that's a really unfortunate statistic. So although these two statistics aren't related, I believe that the system that I developed can actually help solve both of these problems. So if we look at some of the existing solutions we have for monitoring occupancy, we really only have one solution. It's the occupant weight sensor. And these are usually installed on the driver and the front passenger seats. And it's to determine whether or not you should engage the airbag in case of an accident. So to make sure you're not engaging the airbag when you have a child sitting in the front, for example. So these aren't really effective for the rear seats because they can't tell the difference between an object that's sitting on the seat versus a child, for example. And so obviously, if we want to detect occupancy other than the front two seats, it's just not going to work for us. So with my proposed system, I have three sensors: an ultrasonic range sensor, a gas sensor, and a microphone. So in terms of the calibration that I conducted for all of these sensors, for the ultrasonic range sensor, I actually used the built-in function from the AF stand sensor library, but I corrected for temperature variations in the distance reading because, inside of a vehicle, you're going to definitely have a lot of temperature fluctuations given the outdoor temperature. For the gas sensor, I applied a Kalman filter because there was a lot of fluctuation in the reading. And then I identified the baseline because I know that there is some CO2 that naturally occurs in the air. So I wanted to identify what that reading was. And then I subtracted it from the readings to determine really what that difference is. And this is the result that I got when I had somebody sitting close by to the sensor so it could really pick up that person exhaling the CO2. In terms of the microphone, I found that the information on the volume was actually stored in the peak to peak, so the amplitude. So every 100 milliseconds, I would calculate that amplitude and I converted it to decibels, accounting for the baseline. And this is the result that I got when I had it close to some loud music. So it really was able to pick up the music close by. So for collecting the data, I taped the sensor board to the sun visor of the driver's side. That way I could have the ultrasonic sensor, directly picking up the person if they're sitting in the seat. And I could also have the gas sensor, really close by to where the person is exhaling so it can pick up their CO2. In terms of the data collection, I wanted to make sure that my model was robust to the different scenarios that you would find yourself in inside of a vehicle. So I collected I had 5 different scenarios. The first one is obviously you just have the empty car and it's off, the windows are rolled up. And then you have an empty car that's off, but the windows are down, so the microphone can pick up ambient sounds from outside, like cars driving by. And then this is the idling situation. So the car is on, it's empty, but you have music running as well in the background. Then you have an occupied car that's off. So this kind of mimics the scenario where you would have a child, for example, sitting in the back on their own and the car is off. And finally, you have your normal driving scenario where there's somebody inside the car, there's music playing, and the car is on. In terms of the data collection, I collected around 2,500 data points and I split them up into a training data set with 2,000 data points and a testing data set for 500 data points. And I first ran dimensionality reduction using principal component analysis. And I found that 99% of the variance can be explained by two of the sensor readings. So that was by the ultrasonic range sensor and the gas sensor. So the microphone actually really contributed very little in terms of anything meaningful. And after that, I ran it through a support vector machine and I got really good results in terms of the classification.
Okay, so now that there's nobody in the vehicle, there's no beeping, there's no light, but if somebody gets into the vehicle, and we wait a couple of minutes,
Now, obviously, I recognize that my system is not perfect and there's actually a lot that can be worked on to make it more robust. So, I'm going to talk about some of the limitations and the next steps that I have. So, first of all, I mentioned that I really want to be able to determine if there's a child, for example, sitting in the back, but I only tested the system in the driver's side. So, further testing to determine whether it can detect people in other areas of the vehicle is really, really important. And because I mentioned some of the applications, determining if someone's idling and turning the car off, or if there's a child, making sure that the AC turns on, we need to integrate this system with the vehicle controls in order to be able to do that. And finally, I think it would be interesting if we could detect alcohol level of the driver to determine if they're under the influence. Can we stop the vehicle so that they don't drive under the influence? Thank you for listening.